The air in the Metropolitan General Emergency Department was a thick cocktail of antiseptic, iron-rich blood and the cloying sweetness of human fear. It was a place of perpetual, controlled chaos, a symphony of beeping monitors, the squeak of rubber soles on polished linoleum, and the clipped, urgent language of life and death. Into this maelstrom walked Elara Vance, her presence a quiet note in the cacophony. She moved with an economy of motion that was unnerving to those who noticed, a stillness at her core that seemed alien in a place fueled by adrenaline. Her scrubs were crisp, her light brown hair pulled back in a severe functional bun, and her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, missed nothing. They swept the room, not with the harried glance of a new nurse on her first day, but with the calm, methodical assessment of a surveyor mapping hostile terrain. She registered the primary exits, the security station with its single, overweight guard watching a sports recap on his phone, the blind spot beneath the stairwell, and the subtle tremor in the hand of the intern trying to insert an IV into a dehydrated patient. Her assigned mentor, a senior nurse named Brenda, whose weary cynicism was etched into the lines around her mouth, gave Elara the briefest of tours. Brenda pointed out the crash carts, the medication dispensary, and the trauma bays as if they were inconvenient landmarks on a road to retirement. She saw Elara's quiet demeanor and mistook it for timidity, another fresh-faced hire who would be chewed up and spat out by the relentless pressure of a top-tier urban ER. Elara simply nodded, her expression unreadable, absorbing the layout of her new battlefield with an intensity that Brenda failed to register. Her hands, when she prepared a saline drip for a patient in Bay 3, were steady and sure, her fingers moving with a practiced dexterity that was almost mechanical. She found a vein on the first try, the needle sliding in with such minimal fuss that the pained patient offered a weak smile of gratitude. She documented vitals, her handwriting a small, precise block script, each number and letter perfectly formed, a testament to a discipline that went far beyond nursing school. On her left forearm, peeking out from the cuff of her scrubs, was a scar. It was not a simple line from a kitchen knife or a fall, but a complex, silvery web of tissue that wrapped around the muscle, a ghost of some catastrophic injury. When Brenda finally noticed it, her curiosity momentarily overcoming her apathy, she gestured toward it with her pen. Elara's gaze followed, and for a fleeting second a shadow passed through her eyes, a flicker of a memory so dark it seemed to momentarily dim the fluorescent lights above. She pulled her sleeve down instinctively. "A climbing accident," she said, her voice soft, level, and utterly devoid of detail. The lie was smooth, practiced, a well-worn shield she had used countless times before. It was a simple, plausible explanation for something impossibly complex, a way to translate the unspeakable violence of a 7.62-millimeter round tearing through flesh and bone into a mundane civilian mishap. Brenda grunted, accepting the explanation without question, and moved on, already bored. But the truth was coiled beneath Elara's placid surface like a sleeping predator. Just 1 week prior, she had not been in a sterile, climate-controlled hospital. She had been lying prone in the dust and rock of a contested borderland thousands of miles away, the sun a merciless hammer overhead. The air had tasted of cordite and diesel, and the only beeping sounds had been the urgent pings of an encrypted satellite uplink. Her name had not been Elara Vance Nurse. It had been Captain Vance, call sign Spectre, leader of a Tier 1 Special Operations Unit so clandestine its existence was a classified secret. The climbing accident was the result of dragging her wounded sergeant from the burning wreckage of a downed Black Hawk while under sustained enemy fire. The quietness Brenda mistook for shyness was the practiced silence of a hunter, a woman trained to move unheard and unseen. The discipline was not from a nursing curriculum. It was forged in the brutal crucible of selection and the life-or-death calculus of countless Black Ops missions. She had walked away from that world, trading her rifle for a stethoscope, hoping to build a life out of the pieces of the one she had systematically dismantled in service to her country. She wanted to save lives, not take them, to wash her hands with antiseptic soap instead of scrubbing away the memory of blood that was not her own. She just wanted peace. Her peace, however, was destined to be short-lived. The serpent in this new garden was Dr. Aris Thorne, the head of emergency medicine. He was a man sculpted from privilege and arrogance. His tailored scrubs, unable to hide the soft paunch of a life, lived far from any real hardship. He wore a gold watch that cost more than a nurse's annual salary, and carried himself with the unearned confidence of someone whose path had always been cleared for him. He saw the ER not as a place of healing, but as his personal fiefdom, and its staff as subjects who existed to reflect his own perceived brilliance. He glided onto the floor midway through Elara's shift, a vortex of smarmy charisma that drew the fawning attention of residents and junior staff. His eyes, small and sharp, scanned the floor and quickly landed on Elara, the unfamiliar face, the quiet one. He watched her for a moment as she calmly titrated a dopamine drip for a patient in septic shock, her focus absolute. Dr. Thorne approached the nurse's station, his voice a smooth, condescending baritone designed for public pronouncements. "Who is the new temp?" he asked Brenda, not even bothering to lower his voice. Elara heard him perfectly, but her expression did not change. Her hands remained steady on the IV pump. Brenda, ever the sycophant, leaned in. "Vance. First day. A bit slow, but she gets the job done. I think the pace might be a little much for her." Thorne smirked, a cruel twist of his lips. He thrived on weakness, real or perceived. It was his currency. He waited for his moment, a predator seeking the perfect opportunity to assert his dominance. It came when an elderly patient, disoriented and frail, accidentally knocked over a tray of sterile supplies. It was a common, trivial event in the chaos of the ER. Elara was there in an instant, her voice low and soothing, reassuring the terrified woman while her hands efficiently began to clean the mess. That was when Thorne struck. He strode over, his expensive leather shoes clicking on the floor. "Nurse!" he barked, the single word cracking like a whip. "What do you think you are doing? We have patients bleeding out in the trauma bays, and you're on the floor playing janitor. Is this the level of urgency you bring to your work?" His voice echoed in the suddenly quiet bay. The elderly patient flinched, tears welling in her eyes. Elara slowly rose to her feet, her body language calm, but her eyes were like chips of ice. She looked directly at Thorne, her gaze unwavering. "My patient needed assistance. Doctor." She was frightened. Thorne let out a short, derisive laugh. "Your patient? That woman is stable. Your job is to anticipate, to triage your priorities. You lack the killer instinct required for a top-tier emergency department. Some people have it, some people don't." He looked around at the assembled staff, who were now watching the spectacle with a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. "I'm starting the pool," he announced loudly. $50 says she doesn't make it to Friday." A few of the younger, more impressionable nurses chuckled nervously. The injustice was a physical thing, a sour taste in the air. Elara felt a familiar, cold fury begin to uncoil in her gut, a feeling she had hoped to leave behind in the desert. But she clamped down on it with iron will. She had a new mission now, survival. She simply held his gaze for a beat longer before turning back to her patient. "It's all right, ma'am," she said, her voice once again gentle. "Everything is going to be fine." Thorne watched her, his lips curled in a victorious sneer. He had marked his territory and established the pack hierarchy. The quiet new nurse was now the designated prey. The next few days were a quiet form of torture. Thorne, true to his word, had made Elara's life a living hell. He had formally placed her on probationary review, citing her lack of initiative and poor time management. This was a death sentence for a new hire, a black mark that would follow her. He assigned her the most undesirable tasks: cleaning bedpans, restocking supply closets, transporting non-critical patients to other wards, work typically reserved for orderlies. It was a deliberate campaign of humiliation designed to break her spirit and force her to quit, thereby allowing him to win his petty $50 bet. The other staff, seeing which way the political winds were blowing, treated her like a ghost. Conversations would cease when she entered a room. Requests for assistance were met with feigned deafness. She ate her lunch alone in a deserted corner of the cafeteria, the isolation a familiar cloak. She endured it all with the same stoic grace she had shown on her first day. She performed every menial task with meticulous precision. The supply closets had never been more organized. The patients she transported complemented her gentle efficiency. She did not complain, did not argue, did not show a single crack in her serene facade. This infuriated Thorne even more than open defiance would have. He couldn't understand her resilience. He saw it as a personal challenge to his authority. On Thursday afternoon, the day before Thorne's deadline, the city's emergency dispatch system erupted. A multi-vehicle pileup on the interstate, a chain reaction involving a jackknifed tractor-trailer and over a dozen cars, had turned a stretch of highway into a war zone. The radio crackled with the grim news. Dozens of casualties, many critical. Metropolitan General, as the closest Level I trauma center, was about to be hit by a tidal wave of human suffering. The controlled chaos of the ER instantly escalated into a frantic, desperate scramble. Doctors and nurses rushed to prepare the trauma bays, their voices sharp with urgency. In the midst of this, Elara was relegated to fetching gurneys from storage. As she wheeled a line of them into the ambulance bay, she saw the first wave arrive. The wail of sirens was deafening. Paramedics burst through the doors, their faces grim, shouting out injury reports. Multiple fractures, unstable pelvis, diminished breath sounds on the left. Among the first wave of victims was a man who seemed different from the others. He was conscious, his eyes sharp and alert despite a nasty gash on his forehead. He was flanked by two grim-faced men in plain clothes who moved with a distinct, rigid posture, their hands never far from the jackets covering their sides. Federal marshals. Elara's trained eye picked them out instantly. This was not just a car crash victim. This was a protected asset. As they wheeled him past, she overheard one of the marshals speaking into his wrist communicator. "Asset is secure at Metropolitan. Repeat, Nightingale is in the nest." It was code. A surge of cold premonition washed over Elara. This was a complication, a dangerous one. She filed the information away, her mind automatically calculating threat vectors and potential vulnerabilities. The ER's glass-fronted entrance, the overcrowded waiting room, the predictable response patterns of hospital security. It was a tactical nightmare. The ER descended into organized bedlam. Every bay was filled, the hallways lined with patients on gurneys. The air was thick with the smell of blood and burned rubber from the victims' clothing. Dr. Thorne was in his element, barking orders, preening for the news cameras that had gathered outside. He was directing the show, ensuring his department looked competent under pressure. He pointedly ignored Elara, leaving her to handle minor lacerations and comfort shell-shocked survivors in the waiting area. Then, the second event began, not with a bang, but with a quiet, chilling precision. A white van, marked with the logo of a commercial laundry service, pulled into a restricted loading dock at the rear of the hospital. 4 men emerged. They were not laundry workers. They were dressed in dark tactical gear beneath their coveralls, and they moved with the fluid, predatory grace of a professional assault team. Their leader, a man with cold, dead eyes and a scar that bisected his eyebrow, was Silas. He checked his sidearm, a suppressed pistol, and nodded to his team. Their objective was inside Nightingale, and they would eliminate anyone who got in their way. They entered through a service corridor, disabling a security camera with a burst of static from a handheld device. Within 90 seconds, they had reached the ER's periphery. The first person to notice them was Officer Ben Carter, a young but competent hospital security guard who was trying to manage the flow of panicked family members. He saw the men moving against the flow of the crowd, their focus too intense, their movements too synchronized. He saw the bulge of a rifle beneath one of their jackets. His hand went to his own sidearm. "Hold on, you can't," he started to say, stepping forward to intercept them. He never finished the sentence. Silas raised his suppressed pistol and, with a sound no louder than a heavy book falling on carpet, fired twice. The rounds struck Carter in the chest and abdomen. He crumpled to the floor, a look of shocked betrayal on his face, his undrawn weapon clattering beside him. The disciplined massacre had begun. The first clear sign of the new, horrifying reality for the ER staff was the sudden, uniform locking of the automatic doors, followed by the communications blackout. Cell phones went dead. The hospital's internal lines were cut. A cold, terrifying silence fell over the external chaos. Silas's team fanned out, their movements economical and brutal. One man secured the main entrance, another the ambulance bay. They were professionals. They did not shout or make grand pronouncements. They established control with the silent threat of their weapons and the cold certainty in their eyes. Panic erupted. Screams echoed through the large room. Staff and patients scrambled for cover. Silas grabbed the nearest person in a position of authority, who happened to be Dr. Aris Thorne. He pressed the muzzle of his pistol to Thorne's temple, the metal cold against his sweat-slicked skin. The arrogant doctor dissolved into a whimpering, terrified mess. "Quiet," Silas hissed, his voice a low growl that cut through the noise. The room fell silent, the only sounds the terrified sobs of patients and the steady beeping of monitors that were indifferent to the human drama unfolding around them. Elara had seen it all. She had been dressing a small cut on a child's arm when she heard the soft foot of the suppressed rounds. She had seen Officer Carter fall. While everyone else descended into panic, a profound and terrible calm had settled over her. The world slowed down. The screams became distant noise. The frantic movement of bodies became a series of predictable patterns. This was her world. This was the environment she had been forged in. The ER nurse persona dissolved like smoke, burned away by the fires of instinct and training. Her mind became a tactical computer, processing variables with inhuman speed. 4 hostiles, armed with suppressed submachine guns and sidearms. They were using a classic 4-man pincer formation to control the space. Their objective was likely the high-value patient she had seen earlier. Officer Carter was bleeding out on the floor, his breathing shallow, a gurgling sound coming from his chest. He had minutes, at best. The hostiles were professional, but overconfident. They saw a room full of soft targets of doctors and nurses, not threats. That was their first and final mistake. Silas held Thorne in front of him like a human shield, his grip tight on the doctor's expensive scrubs. "We are looking for a patient," Silas announced, his voice steady. "He was in a car accident. Give him to us, and we will leave. No one else has to get hurt." Thorne, his face ashen and slick with sweat, began to babble. "I don't know. We have so many. Please, don't hurt me." Silas pressed the gun harder against his temple. "A mistake. Do not lie to me." He gestured with his chin towards the federal marshal's body, lying near the triage desk. His friends brought him in. "Now, where is he?" Thorne's eyes darted around frantically. He was about to break. He would trade a patient's life for his own, without a second thought. He opened his mouth to speak, to point towards the curtained-off VIP suite where they had placed the witness. It was in that exact moment that Elara Vance made her decision. The time for hiding was over. The wolf could no longer wear the sheep's fleece. Her posture changed. The slight deferential slump of the browbeaten nurse vanished, replaced by a spine made of steel. Her shoulders squared, her chin lifted. Her eyes, no longer soft or passive, became hard, focused, and utterly lethal. From a nearby surgical tray, her hand moved in a blur, plucking a disposable scalpel. It was a flimsy, inadequate weapon, but it was what she had. Her target was not a person, but a large ceiling-mounted patient lift, its thick hydraulic line exposed. With a flick of her wrist born from thousands of hours of weapons training, she threw the scalpel. It flew end over end, a silver glint in the fluorescent light, and struck the hydraulic line with surgical precision. The sharp blade punctured the tubing. High-pressure fluid erupted with a deafening hiss, spraying a fine mist into the air and creating the perfect momentary distraction. Every head, including Silas's, snapped towards the sound. It was a window of less than a second. For Elara, it was an eternity. She moved. Her first target was the mercenary closest to her, the one guarding the corridor. She exploded from her position, covering the 15 feet between them in 3 silent, fluid strides. Before he could reacquire his sight picture, she was on him. Her left hand clamped down on his weapon, redirecting the barrel towards the ceiling. Her right hand, fingers rigid in a knife hand strike, slammed into his throat, crushing his larynx. As he choked, she drove her knee into his groin, folding him in half. A brutal elbow strike to the back of his skull sent him crashing to the floor, unconscious before he landed. She stripped the submachine gun from his grasp, the familiar weight of the weapon settling into her hands, as if it were an extension of her own body. The safety, the magazine release, the charging handle, her fingers moved over them on pure muscle memory. She didn't raise the weapon to aim. She didn't need to. From a low, ready position, she pivoted, acquiring her next target, the hostel, covering the ambulance bay. He was already turning, bringing his rifle to bear. He was too slow. Elara fired a controlled, 2-round burst. The suppressed shots were barely audible over the hissing of the broken hydraulic line. Both rounds struck him center mass, punching through his tactical vest and dropping him instantly. 2 down, the entire sequence had taken less than 3 seconds. The remaining 2 hostiles were now reacting, spinning to engage the sudden, impossible threat that had erupted from the ranks of the cowering civilians. Silas, recovering from his shock, shoved Dr. Thorne to the floor and raised his own weapon. The third mercenary, positioned near the main entrance, opened fire. His shots were wild, panicked, stretching a line across the far wall and shattering a bank of computer monitors. Civilians screamed and dove for cover. Elara did not flinch. She dropped to one knee behind a heavy-duty gurney, the incoming rounds pinging off the metal frame. She was calm. Her breathing was even, her heart rate controlled. In the chaos, she saw everything. She saw the ricochet paths, the angles of fire, the locations of the non-combatants. She pushed the gurney forward, using it as mobile cover, and fired another precise burst around the side, striking the third hostile in the leg. He screamed and went down, his weapon skittering across the floor. Now it was just Silas. He was better than his men. He was using Thorne's fallen body for cover, firing controlled shots towards Elara's position. He was a professional, but Elara was something else entirely. She abandoned the submachine gun, letting it clatter to the floor. It was too unwieldy in these close quarters. She moved again, a gray blur weaving through the maze of medical equipment, and terrified people. She grabbed a heavy stainless steel IV pole. Silas tracked her movement, firing, but she was impossibly fast, always a step ahead of his aim. She closed the distance, swinging the heavy base of the IV pole like a medieval mace. It connected with Silas's rifle, shattering the stock, and sending the weapon flying from his hands. He stared at his empty hands in disbelief and drew his sidearm. Elara was already inside his guard, driving the end of the pole into his sternum, forcing the air from his lungs in a pained grunt. A swift, brutal strike to his wrist sent his pistol skittering away. Disarmed, Silas snarled and lunged, trying to grapple. Elara met his charge, flowing around him, and applied a chokehold with chilling efficiency. For a few seconds, he struggled, his powerful muscles straining against her, but her technique was flawless. His movements became sluggish, his eyes rolled back, and he slumped to the floor, unconscious. Dead silence descended upon the ER. The only sounds were the continued hissing of the broken lift, the soft whimpering of the terrified staff, and Elara's own steady, controlled breathing. She stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the wreckage of the brief violent battle. 4 professional mercenaries, neutralized in under 30 seconds by one woman in blue scrubs. She picked up Silas's pistol, expertly cleared it, and placed it on a nearby counter. Then, as if flipping a switch, the warrior vanished. The nurse returned. She walked calmly to Officer Carter's side, knelt, and began applying pressure to his wounds, her voice low and reassuring. "Stay with me, officer. Help is coming." The entire ER staff, Brenda, the interns, the other nurses, and a trembling Dr. Aris Thorne, stared at her, their minds unable to process what they had just witnessed. They looked at the woman they had mocked, ostracized, and bet against. They looked at the quiet, timid nurse who had just dismantled a team of trained killers with the detached efficiency of a force of nature. Their faces were a mask of shock, awe, and a dawning, terrible sense of shame. They thought they knew who she was. They had been dead wrong. Just as the stunned silence reached its peak, the main entrance doors were forced open with a loud metallic groan. A team of heavily armed SWAT officers poured in, weapons raised, shouting commands. But they stopped short, their own professional composure shattered by the scene before them. The threat was already over. Behind them, a fleet of black government SUVs had screeched to a halt, their doors flying open before they had even stopped moving. A man stepped out of the lead vehicle and strode into the ER as if he owned it. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his face a granite block of authority, wearing the immaculate uniform of a 4-star general of the United States Army. On his collar, the silver stars gleamed under the flickering hospital lights. He was a man who radiated power, an apex predator in a world of them. This was General Marcus Thorne. He ignored the SWAT team, the downed hostiles, and the cowering civilians. His sharp, intelligent eyes swept the room, cataloging the scene in a single glance until they landed on Elara, who was still tending to the wounded security guard. He also saw his son, Aris, huddled against a wall like a frightened child. A flicker of profound disgust crossed the general's face before he focused again on Elara. He strode across the linoleum floor, his polished boots making no sound. The SWAT team parted for him like the Red Sea. He came to a halt directly in front of Elara as she worked. She looked up, her expression weary but calm. The general's hard face softened with something that looked like immense respect and a deep, abiding sadness. His voice, when he spoke, was a low rumble that commanded the absolute attention of every person in the room. It was not a voice that asked, it was a voice that declared truth. "Captain Vance," he said, his tone formal, yet filled with personal warmth. "I had a feeling I would find you here." He used her rank. The word captain hung in the air, electric and impossible. Dr. Aris Thorne's head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief and a dawning horror. He looked from his powerful, estranged father to the quiet nurse he had tormented, his mind failing to connect the two. The other staff members exchanged confused, shocked glances. Brenda's jaw was slack, her face pale. General Thorne knelt beside Elara, his gaze falling on the wounded officer. "Is he stable?" he asked, his tone shifting to that of a field commander assessing a casualty. "He has a tension pneumothorax and probable internal bleeding," Elara reported, her voice clipped and professional, the language of a combat medic, not a civilian nurse. "I've sealed the chest wound, but he needs a chest tube and a surgeon now." The general nodded, then looked directly at his son. "Aris, get a trauma team in here, now." His voice was a thunderclap that made his son flinch. Aris, scrambling to his feet, suddenly remembered he was a doctor and began shouting orders, his voice shrill and unsteady. The spell was broken, and the ER staff, spurred by the general's command, rushed to help Officer Carter. General Thorne turned his full attention back to Elara. He gestured to the carnage around them. "Your work?" he asked, though it was not a question. Elara gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The general's expression was grim. "I was told you requested a discharge to find a quieter life, Captain. It seems trouble has a way of finding you." He rose to his full height and turned to face the stunned audience of doctors and nurses. His eyes, like chips of flint, swept over them, finally landing on his trembling son. "You people have no idea who you have been working with," he began, his voice booming through the silent room. "You see a nurse. I see one of the finest warriors this country has ever produced." He took a step closer to Aris, who seemed to shrink under his father's gaze. "This is Captain Elara Vance. For 6 years, she was the operational commander of Task Force Aegis, a unit so secret that the official government position is that it does not exist. She has led more missions into hostile territory than most soldiers read about in books." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He then pointed to the faded, web-like scar on Elara's arm. My son, in his infinite ignorance, probably assumed that was from falling off a bicycle. That scar is from shrapnel she took during Operation Nightfall. She received that injury while pulling my best operator from the burning wreckage of a helicopter, under direct and sustained fire from an entire enemy platoon. After her medic was killed, she performed emergency surgery on 3 of her own wounded men with nothing but a combat knife and a standard field kit, saving all of them. The general's voice grew louder, filled with a cold, righteous fury. After her position was compromised, she held off that enemy platoon, alone for 72 hours, with dwindling ammunition and multiple injuries, to ensure the rest of her team could be extracted. The official after-action report states that she single-handedly neutralized over 50 enemy combatants before reinforcements could arrive. She was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross in a ceremony so secret only myself and the president were in attendance. She has bled for this country in ways you people cannot even begin to comprehend. And when it was all over, she didn't ask for a parade or a promotion. She asked for a quiet life. She wanted to heal people, to wash the blood off her hands. So she came here. The general's gaze was now fixed entirely on his son. And what did she find? She found you, a petty, arrogant little coward who bullies his staff, a man who values his reputation more than his patience. You started a betting pool, he spat the words like poison, on whether a decorated national hero had the grit to last until Friday. You humiliated her. You endangered a federal witness under my protection. You, son, are a disgrace to my name, to this hospital, and to the profession of medicine. The downfall of Dr. Aris Thorne was as swift and total as it was public. General Thorne gestured to 2 of the federal marshals. "Arrest him. Obstruction of a federal investigation, reckless endangerment, and I'm sure we'll find more once we look at his finances." Aris stared, his face a mask of crumbling arrogance. "Father, you can't." He whimpered. "Do not call me that," the general roared. "You are no son of mine." The marshals hauled a protesting Aris Thorne away, his career, his reputation, and his freedom vanishing in an instant. The catharsis in the room was a palpable thing. The general turned back to the staff. His expression was one of utter contempt. "Let this be a lesson to all of you. The world is full of quiet professionals, of giants who walk among you disguised as ordinary people. Judge them by their character and their competence, not by the volume of their voice." There was a long, heavy silence. Then, from the back of the room, one of the young interns, the one whose hand had been shaking earlier, began to clap. It was a hesitant, solitary sound at first, but then Brenda joined in, her face streaked with tears of shame and awe. Soon, the entire ER, from the nurses to the residents to the SWAT officers, erupted in thunderous applause. It was not for a nurse, it was for a hero they had been too blind to see. Elara had finished stabilizing Officer Carter, who was now being prepped for surgery by the trauma team. She stood up, her face showing no sign of triumph or vindication, only a deep, profound weariness. She had wanted to escape this life, but it had dragged her back in. The applause died down as she walked towards the general. She unceremoniously handed him the pistol she had taken from Silas. "I'm done here," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Her purpose in this place was concluded. She had tried to be a healer, but the world had demanded a warrior. The general placed a heavy, comforting hand on her shoulder. "There's always a place for you back with us, Captain," he said gently. "We never stopped looking for you." Elara looked around the emergency department one last time, at the faces of the people who had misjudged her so completely. She felt no anger, only a hollow sadness. She gave a small, tired nod to the general and walked with him towards the exit, leaving her blue scrubs and her short-lived civilian life behind. She was escorted past the flashing lights of the news cameras and into the back of a black SUV, vanishing back into the shadows from whence she came. Back inside Metropolitan General, the staff began the long process of cleaning up, their movements subdued, their minds replaying the impossible events they had witnessed. They had given her until Friday. She had given them a story they would tell for the rest of their careers, a humbling, terrifying reminder that you can never truly know the battles a person has fought. They thought they were judging a new nurse, a quiet woman they deemed too weak for their world. They never imagined they were standing in the presence of a legend, a hidden wolf who had tried for a short while to live among sheep. The incident served as a stark lesson burned into the hospital's collective memory. That true strength isn't loud or arrogant. It is quiet, it is disciplined, and it is revealed not in words, but in action. When everything is on the line and the only thing that matters is the will to stand and fight when everyone else has fallen. The scars people carry are not always signs of weakness. Sometimes they are medals of honor, earned in wars you will never see.